chair. Just let one of the staff issue know and you can find your chair. So yeah, we are dual dentists. My name is David Farrow.
My name is Alice Farrow.
This is the final in our series of curatorial programs for Issue Project Room. At the top, I just want to thank Issue staff for supporting us as we realized our vision. I think that tonight's program represents a culmination of a lot of things that we've been thinking about since we started for Dentist about 2 years ago. Evil Dentist has always been a performance and research project. And what we mean by that is that there is a creative intellectual thrust in both performance and in thought. So as part of tonight's program, we've assembled artists and thinkers, and they're interchangeable within the same person, to speak to the demands of artists in the 21st century under the political times we live in and the economic climate we exist in. So tonight's program consists of a panel discussion, which will follow our introduction, and then 2 performances, one by BK and one by Niall. And also, we have an installation separate from BK's beautiful installation, which is here. It consists of 2 pieces. One piece is called No Such Thing as a Free Gift, and the other piece is called Landscape Brooklyn Waterfront. So in between the sets, we invite you all to explore the installations, not BK's though, unless he's okay with that. We hope that you will give your attention to the panels when it's their turn to come up. We'll have a brief Q&A at the end of the panel sessions, and our moderator will introduce the panels. But before we begin, or before we formally start the program, we just have a statement we would like to read. So this is really the research component of Evil Dentist. 1. Property relations. Art cannot be separated from the space in which it is made and performed. From lofts to squats, theaters to basements, the ownership of property shapes what art can be. We believe in collective ownership and management of property. We believe in a world where the decisions about what neighborhood should be are made by its residents. We believe artists can help facilitate conversations about the city to come if they let long-term residents lead these conversations.
2. The duty of arts institutions is to challenge commonplace ideals in service of shifting social, cultural, and political attitudes. We reject the neutrality of the arts and of arts institutions, particularly when they launder the reputations of perpetrators of violence. This was the case with the Sackler family at various museums, and with Lauren Canders, former Whitney board member and owner of Safariland, a manufacturer of law enforcement and military supplies, including bulletproof vests, bomb-defusing robots, gun holsters, and tear gas. We believe arts institutions should make difficult arguments, should force people to reconsider their beliefs, and should push for a more ethical society.
3. Artistic life is split between the freedoms of a precarious life, doing it yourself, and the constraints of a stable life in institutions. There is no space free of moral compromise, as both spheres negotiate the contradictions of making art with scarce resources. The difference lies in how these resources are distributed and what strings are attached. DIY's limits can become artistic, social, and political freedom, where collaboration and sharing are the norm, if artists can find the time and resources to support themselves. Institutional life offers financial freedom at the cost of limitations on speech and expression. Recent instances, such as Art Forum firing its editor for sharing a letter in solidarity with Palestine, or Radio removing a DJ for wearing a shirt with the word Palestine, and Fuse Factory in Ohio sending invitations to artists who took part in the Palestinian solidarity protests, illustrate the chilling ways in which institutions attempt to silence artists. We reject institutions that use the financial precarity of artists to restrict their freedom of expression.
4. In critiquing the current structures of property and power that underlie both the DIY and institutional art worlds, it's equally important to envision what an ideal system to support the arts would look like. Rather than asking for the bare minimum, we should be ambitious and detailed in our imagination of what the future can hold. This expansiveness of imagination can operate as the foundation foundation on which solidarity that holds people together in dark times can grow and sustain us.
Without evocation, we say free Palestine. Let's bring up our panelists. Panelists, moderator, come on up. Without equivocation, excuse me. Free Palestine.
Is this, yeah, it is on me. Thank you. So timer in the light, can't be in the dark. Thank you for that amazing introduction or preface to this conversation. So we are here to talk about the state of DIY spaces and culture in New York City and beyond. And I, in thinking about the various themes and ideas of this conversation, I sort of have been thinking a lot about kind of like DIY spaces as political projects. And I think there couldn't have been more appropriate introduction to that topic than what we just heard from Alice and David. So thank you both for having us and for that. So I thought maybe each of the panelists here, we could start with introductions. So I'd love if everyone could, introduce yourself, talk about your background in DIY music and art and culture, and maybe talk a little bit about how your involvement in the spaces and projects that you've been part of have either shaped your political perspectives or shaped your creative practice in some way.
Okay. We're reading left to right. My name's John Pugh. Let's see. That's where do I start? When I was a teenager, we couldn't go to the one club in Little Rock, Arkansas that booked live music because we didn't drink. We weren't old enough to drink, and they didn't, in those days, book the kind of music that we were playing, which was punk rock, whatever that is. So we started doing shows in the riverfront park that they just renovated. And this infused or informed everything that I've done since, because it showed me that you don't have to rely on institutions or places that are built for capitalism, essentially, to make money, to create expression, and more importantly, create community. Essentially, anywhere that there's an electrical outlet, you can go plug in some amplifiers and make art, whatever that means to you. So from there, I kind of learned what DIY was, which very broadly meant that you were doing something outside of what was presented to you as this is the format in which we do this, and B, you care more about how you want to present what you're doing. And I think this gets lost sometimes in the image of DIY, do-it-yourself, underground communities, where people think that the freedom equals that you are kind of off the hook. You don't have to pay attention, you don't have to care, you can kind of just like, yeah, fuck it. Trash a squat, who cares? There's no rules anymore, which is not to say that there's not a creative force in forms of destruction or forms of like, let's just throw the rule book out and make it up as we go along. But in order to do that, you take on more responsibility for, okay, so now we have to come up with a new system that also operates in a way that is more efficient, or more equitable, or more community-minded than what's going on down the street at the club or in the museum or wherever. So I'm going off a little too much. I currently am in New York, and I curate music and art events at different venues, mostly right now in Transpicos and Queens. Previous to that, I was one of kind of the founding crew of Hollow, which in its original iteration, not how it operates now. And throughout all that, finding different electrical outlets to do shows in places where you're not supposed to do shows, or make art where you're not supposed to make art. That's my time. I'm just going to pass my.
Hi, thank you. That's great. I'm Ricky Sally Zucker. I also perform under Yata. I started making or wanting to make music in like 2014, and I didn't know how, so I bought a loop pedal and I just moved in my room, actually sitting exactly like this for hours, and I would record them on my iPhone, and so I was like, okay, where is someone who doesn't know how to make music? And then I sent like 5 voice memos to Palisades, and that was where I had my first show. And then, if you know, you know. And so that, it's like, I had no business doing that, because it really wasn't good. Actually, because I was like, okay, I have voice memos, I need a beat. So I said, okay, I'm gonna get a 404. So then I got a 404 off of Craigslist, and the person who sold it to me was someone named Wesley, who now works at Pioneer Works. And so I never met this person, but I was like, hey, can you make beats for the show that I have in 2 weeks? And so then I had my bandmate, we only played one show together, but I just, after all those years, I think last year I ran into her and I was like, wow. It's really fun seeing where DIY people graduate to. It really feels like graduation or reunion when I see everyone in a different institution. But anyway, sorry, that's a long story. But so I guess the role was operations coordinator for maybe like a year and a half at Silent Barn. I'm not sure what year, maybe 2017 or 2018. I knew people who lived there, and I hadn't really, I guess before that, I lived in Flux Factory, which is like was a co-op / DIY space in Long Island City. But yeah, I had never seen people so dedicated to being ambitious about creating something new together. And like I think I was just stunned that there would be like 60 people down to have a conversation about something when it's hard to even have a conversation with another person when you're trying to work through conflict. So I learned a lot about people's hearts. I think I found really warm, passionate people that had I not fallen into that space, I don't know that I would have found that many people in one place. But yeah, I moved
used to set up an annual acoustic festival in Washington Square Park. That was sort of, yeah, kind of, I feel like I relate to what both John and Ricky have said, different parts of their introductions. Like, I came into setting up shows just because just a lack of accessibility as like a young teenager. When I grew up, I grew up at a time where like there was sort of like a kid band explosion when I was like in middle school. The movie School of Rock came out. It's true though. I mean, it was an interesting time to grow up. There was like sort of this influx of like failed musicians or like parents who like failed musician parents or like parents who were not failed musicians or they're like recording engineers or whatever, sort of pushing their kids into like starting bands and more interested kids playing like I guess rock music. And it was a community of little, like very, very young people just like trying to do shows wherever we could. And that's, I guess, really my roots from there. Like just, I was lucky to grow up at a time where the laws were a lot different for all, I can't really speak to the specifics of it to be honest, but there was just a lot more availability of like all ages shows, like all across the city. It was me. I don't know if it was less legally precarious or just like the. Sorry, can y'all hear me? Alright, cool. It just got so much louder. I'm not sure how much the laws changed or if like the city and the police department like started enforcing them more, but when I was in high school, there were all ages shows at like the old knitting factory. There was a place called the Cake Shop on the Lower East Side where I went to high school, and it was really like just like kids, like teenage takeover, just like kids would literally be like flooding the streets for these matinee shows and doing a lot of illegal things that I think eventually led to a lot of those spaces either being forced to close or just tightening up, like, oh, we can't really do that anymore. But I'm lucky to have grown up during this time where I got to like play a bunch of shows at like cool spots and kind of almost like took it for granted until once I got out of high school, I started working at Palisades, and that was one of the first places that like let me put on shows. Started booking shows at Shea Stadium, which was also a place that I went to all the time. And then Palisades eventually got marched. The march program is like, it's less active now, but it's basically like a program within like all the various policing departments where like it's like the NYPD and the fire department and the buildings department and like the health department all sort of enclosed on like a space and just write as many fines as they possibly can. And it basically like will always lead to like immediate closure of any illegal or legal space or anything because even the legal spaces aren't adhering to all the codes that they're supposed to like legally be open, like any restaurant too, you know. So like Palisades got marched, and right when the same week that happened, this place called The Glove opened up, and I started working door there, and I ended up becoming one of the main programmers there up until its closure, and then COVID happened, and then me and some of my friends who I did shows with at The Glove started a space called Chaos Computer that closed just this last July. So yeah, now I'm just booking, like John, just booking shows wherever I can, where it makes sense. Friends like bike shop, you know, any like business that will let me do something for like no room rate or low room rate. Yeah, so I'm still doing it.
Cool, thank you guys so much. And yeah, it's interesting. There's obviously so many like similarities between the stories and so many like threads through each of your backgrounds and paths, like getting involved in this thing that we like refer to as DIY culture and music. But there's also differences too, like approach to DIY organizing, making DIY music culture as like all you need is an outlet and you can show up, do a generator show in a park or something. That's a different set of realities than we're going to find a building in Bushwick in the year 2018 or whatever you guys are doing with the club and chaos computer. Like find a building, sign a lease, figure out how to make the thing happen. So I was hoping maybe we could sort of like group the conversation a little bit and discussing some of the material realities of sort of what it takes to like make DIY culture happen in New York City in the year 2023 or the past decade, as we all kind of like have experiences ranging across the past 10 years or so. How do the spaces that you all have been part of, how have they survived in the New York City real estate market? Or maybe like, what can we learn from some of the projects we've all been part of about?
Yeah, sure. From my experience of being there on the ground when a lot of these like fabled spaces started, I think it's important to acknowledge that it's just the nature of New York real estate. Like, in order for a place like this to exist, there needs to be a landlord who either a landlord who is willing to cast a blind eye on the situation and be flexible with how space is used, or someone buys a building which is like unthinkable in this current climate. But I wish it was not that way. But there's, from my experience, there's always someone who is sort of like footing the bill of like a deposit for like to start a space like this. Ideally, someone who's willing to like not be super involved past that, but like it just it happens every time. That's just the way things work in New York right now. A landlord is not going to be interested in your cool idea. They just want to see a certain amount of figures in a bank account just to prove that you can pay them. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how things play out even more post wherever you are now. Like this, since 2020, and people who talk to me, they're like, oh, you're on this shit again? But yes, since 2020, I think there was such a kneecapping of the hierarchical standards of how things ran. I mean, we were all here when we're not necessarily here, we're all here on planet Earth. And then to have a kind of really global catastrophe on this level happen is unprecedented in anyone alive on planet Earth. None of us were here for the 1918 flu, so it really impacts how society, however you couch that, how it runs smoothly. And I think it really shook things to its foundation in such a way that it showed some of us who already knew this just intuitively, but also a lot of people who are waking up to the fact that the people up top really don't know what's going on. And that causes a ripple effect through everything. So I think a lot of the business as usual apparatus of New York, which is a lot, which has a lot to do with real estate, has a lot to do with how landlords make their decisions and what their priorities are, as opposed to, what the artist's priorities are. So I guess it's all to say I'm still seeing how things develop, because I think the hierarchies that were there previously that were adhered to, this kind of you have to pay to play kind of feeling like, oh, you're in New York City, well, you just get ready to pay some money. You walk out the door, that's $20. You didn't do anything, but you spent $20 already. And that's just New York, being New York, you can't make it here for you. You can make it here, you can make it anywhere kind of shit. I'm like, no, that's not normal. And this city can run in a way that is, I think, more community-based, because that's the thing that actually kicked in when society got kneecapped. You had people walking out of the house, talking to each other, figuring out, who is the person who's selling me this tomato? What's your story? Oh, great. Now we're friends, and now I work at my tomatoes. That extrapolates to all kinds of different relationships. So when it comes to the artist-landlord relationship, I kind of see it not being so like cast in stone necessarily. It's because I think at some point this town is building. We're living in a constant construction site everywhere you go, and you just feel like, okay, it just means it's getting more expensive in this neighborhood. That is, I think it's going to eat itself. It's not going to, and I don't want to be here like predicting it's all going to be okay, everybody, because society's going to crumble. See, it's doing it on its own already. I just think that there's going to be a bottom line still of no one is coming in to spend $3.5 million for the shithole. So, okay, artists, do what you do. Make a place nice and make it culturally viable and bring people there, bring life to it, because that's essentially what we do. We bring life energy to things, and other people call it art, and we're just like, no, that's just life energy, but yeah, go ahead, paint me, since you call it art. So yeah, I'm still like a question mark in my head. Like, when's the other foot gonna come down when they realize we have a lot of empty space in the city that's not being used, a lot of empty retail spots not being used, a lot of people looking to use space. That's all they need. Most people in this room, if you're an artist, are like, all I need is a room and time and just the wherewithal where I'm not just in this constant state of tooth and nail survival to create this life energy. Please, something.
Yeah, absolutely. And just space, right? We were just talking about this before. There obviously is, I think artists are extremely resourceful, especially people in DIY. We can look around and maybe not have like leases on buildings and like spaces of our own, and people are incredibly like resourceful about being able to, okay, then we'll just do a show on the Williamsburg Bridge at 3 a.m. or we'll do a show in Prospect Park, and that's, also sick. But what is the, value of having a lease on a space, like having a room, thinking about this question of like the material reality that's needed in order to have access to like a space, got me thinking about, well, like why do we need these spaces? I'm curious, if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I guess in thinking about, I wasn't here, I guess I left in 2019, so I'm just grateful to hear about how it's been. It sounds hard, and the fact that you all are like committed to it means it's real, because not everybody would do that. I guess one thing that comes to mind if we're talking about like material, I think something that I guess maybe I saw in Southland, I've seen elsewhere, is also like the negation of the resources that exist because of like I don't know, the aesthetic of there were people who had money and there's the aesthetic of, and this isn't with every place, but sometimes I think more transparent conversation about money amidst DIY communities could actually be really helpful, because I think oftentimes there are people amongst us who do have the funds to facilitate what we need, and I think that for things to move to a place where people are genuinely working together, I think there has to be like a transparency about class, education, all of these things. So that's always been like a block in my head, because in having conversations about, oh, this place is closing down, there have been people amongst us who really could make a shift, but I think sometimes there's like a stigma about people having money. And so that's something I think about when I think about creating like a sustainable community, that kind of class transparency.
I would definitely agree with that. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like what Liz was saying about like why do we need a space, I think it's simple as like, it's funny because a lot of times like when you're running, from my experiences of running illegal spaces, excuse to tell the police or anyone suspicious is that it's just like an art studio or a recording studio. But that's as simple as it, like, you know, thinking like a space is like, the same reason why we need space is the reason why any like artist needs a studio to develop their practice. A community space can be a place where a community can like come and develop their practices. Obviously, like if there's nothing available or there's limited availability for places like that, then yeah, we'll do it outside when we can. I mean that's like, but it's definitely like, you know, eventually the limitations will always become present at a certain point, and I think that when a space like Chaos Computer or Silent Barn or and the Palisades, any of these places come to existence, the need for it becomes super apparent immediately because the people will just rally behind it because they know what it means to them. They know that it's a place where people will get to develop, meet other artists, and that can't really exist in a space to the extent that we all need in a space that its main priority is maintaining a bottom line of being able to like pay rent at a very high rate because they're following all the legal rules.
Oh no, I was just going to say, yeah, I think there are a lot of people who wouldn't have been musicians had there not been these spaces, which is sad to think about. But, you know, there are a lot of people who, without the space, wouldn't have even had the time to experiment, to figure out how they want to play, who they want to be. And it's sort of like, that's a big legacy of any place, like Silent Barn or Palisades, or that, you know, it gives people a space to get to know themselves and to be able to continue doing that.
Yeah, the things that you both said on the yes and this, the feeling that resources are important, and transparency of resources, and really, this kind of understanding. I think I came out of deep roots in underground anarchists. You know, money is the root of all evil. Let's dismantle capitalism on all fronts. This is the way that we're going to make this work. We have to like create an alternative model. That's all still true, but the bottom line still is we live in the system and we are all, you know, victims, for lack of a better word, of capitalism every day we wake up. And we need to remember that artists need to get paid and that the rent needs to get paid for the space that we're making art in. And if you have the means and you have the resources, you should feel free to step up and not feel like, oh, I'm just going to hang back because I don't want anyone to know I'm secretly rich or something. Or that I secretly have a resource that could be of use here, you know, like my uncle owns a building in the Bronx that is empty. We can do shows there, but whatever. I think this comes down to like the root or the core of DIY is what I was talking about earlier, personal. Everyone feeling like I'm responsible for everything that goes on. There's a crushed beer can in the corner, I'm just gonna pick it up, put it in the trash, or leave, that kind of thing. And it goes, extrapolates to all the things. You know, it's like I have resources and I want to share them with people, and then you'll find other people who are like, oh great, I have a resource that you need, that you don't have. Let me share that with you, et cetera, et cetera.
People come from all walks of life, and there's no reason to be ashamed for how you were raised. If you were raised with money, that you have no control over that, but you do have control over how you share your resources and what you see value in. So, if if there were funding for the arts, we're not in Europe, like if there were funding for the arts, it would be a different story, but there's not. So we have to rely on people who oftentimes want to remain anonymous and just be like patrons and, GoFundMe.
Yeah. This all segues really well into what I was hoping would be the next topic that we were talking about, is just sort of, DIY spaces as political projects. We're up against the idea of, artists and people who make DIY culture happen in a city like New York City are up against impossible odds, but I think that what draws people into these types of scenes and communities is, desire and ability to imagine simply a different world, or to be able to imagine alternatives. As we talked about with David and Alice before this event, like DIY spaces are projects that exist on stolen land under racial capitalism and are haunted by gentrification. But whereas arts institutions often have to work to sort of appease our world power players, for people who are involved in DIY, confronting and grappling with oppressive status quos is usually often inherently part of the projects that we're doing. So I was wondering to each of you what it means to see DIY spaces as political projects, and if there are any examples that have been inspiring to you over the years.
I wish that it was more common in New York City. I admire the efforts of Silent Barn and Chaos Computer. When we started it, we were always had the intention of trying to sort of create a space like the club, but with more political intention, because everyone who started it was more on the same page, which is not always the case when a space starts. It's usually a bunch of different people who want different things. I've toured a lot in the past 10 years, and I would say a lot of spaces in Chicago were really inspiring me. I think that in Chicago, a lot of the DIY art scene, or underground arts, or whatever you want to call it, is more inherently intertwined with activism, in that city, in a way that's really inspired me. But I think that has a lot to do with just the city itself, its history, its relationship to activism and the police departments, terrorism of people on the south side. I just saw there's a place called Hostel Euphoria that was totally just a commune, and that was really inspiring to me. And this place called the Dojo in Pilsen that had a lot of great fundraisers and events, and that was definitely inspiring to me. Also, when I was in high school, my cousin took me to this place called the Omni in Oakland, which I remember being there and thinking this is kind of Silent Barn, but it was way more just for political action, organizing. There would also be shows there, but they had screen printing, print shops, all kind of an auditorium where they were showing radical films and all kinds of stuff like that. It was inspiring.
I was going to say Chaos Computer was a great inspiration and a great kind of, welcome, everybody. Because it was, that intentional, we're going to make this operate as a collective, for better or for worse, it's not easy. And this goes towards what I was first saying about you got to care more, you got to be more patient, you got to carry the trash out, so to speak, metaphorically and literally. So it's that feeling that I saw people really engaging with it in a way that they engaged, that was different than how they engaged with other things, because they see it as a community action in and of itself, a political action for it to exist, period. But also, we were reminded by the curatorial vision and the things that were brought there, and things that were given a platform. To me, that's the statement's baked into the cake already. And I see other things, like you said, not so much in New York per se, the New York version I see, and this is kind of through a post-2020 lens, is that there's radicalism or this kind of new paradigm vision being expressed through just the artists themselves and the kind of work that they're bringing and the format. It's not necessarily we have a big banner behind us that says X this. It's or that we have a bunch of pamphlets laid out or that's explicit. To me, there's a lot of like political ramifications to just the simple act of saying we have an idea that doesn't exist and we want to bring it into reality. Period. We're going to create a thing that the system has told us is fucking science fiction, and we're going to make it actual. And that's, to me, what art is about in general. So, in the grand scheme, art is a political act if you want it to be, and if you are engaged with it in a way that is about engaging with other human beings. If it's just your narcissistic expression, I guess that's political too. So, but there, you know. So, yeah, that we need more of that in New York, everywhere, planet Earth, solar system.
Yeah, I guess, I'm thinking about this. I started thinking about places you can go to be without buying coffee as like a measure of how open a place is, or just the fact that there's really, you have to buy a coffee to sit down or to pee anywhere. So I think about Blue Stockings, which is a place I have to pee often, and it's a place where I figure, hey, I can go there, I can sit down. You know, there's every night, there would be like a talk about a certain issue, mental illness, or anything that's going on, and like a zine library, and even a silent room, you could go there and just hang out. So I think, when I think about spaces being political, I think being able to just hang out is a big deal. One, because of the intersection of like mental illness and houselessness, and that's another thing I think about when I think about these spaces being like political. Is like, how accessible is this? How can we bring in people who have a harder time existing in this world for whatever reason? Money, brain,
It's interesting that you brought that up too. Sometimes when I think about like DIY spaces and DIY music scenes as sort of like movement projects, it's like, what are we organizing for? Like lately, it just seems like we're organizing against people being alienated and isolated. Like that in and of itself is like an organizing project that DIY music spaces, I think, like really work towards at their best.
Sorry, I have one more thought. Just the thing that differentiates a lot of these spaces I think we're talking about that resonate with us, and that to me have that inherent political value, is that how do I put it? It's not about the show, and there's a lot of show in New York. A lot of people coming here to put on a show. And that's great. That's kind of, part of New York's cultural heritage, or whatever you want to call it. Like Broadway, coming here, be a star, whatever you can do. And I think this is something that exists kind of parallel to that, or in an alternate dimension to that. It's simultaneous, and there's a lot of people who work in Broadway who turn around and go do some insane performance art in a basement somewhere. So it's all New York doing its New York thing. But what I'm worried about is like that we don't value things like outside of the show. Something you can't just like, well, this is worth X amount of money. You're like, well, I don't know how much it's worth. This is my life energy. I'm just giving it to you. you want to put a dollar amount on it? I don't know. And that makes people turn around and be like, well, it's worthless to me then. It doesn't, you don't know what it means, you don't know how much it's worth, and I'm not gonna, it doesn't mean it's worth anything. Which also is like something in the back of my head thinking about, I'm a certain generation, I remember the 20th century, and there's some people in this room who don't remember the 20th century. So their conception of the way music and art operates is, oh, you open up your phone and it's right there, free of charge. Doesn't have anything to do with money, which, to my little teenage anarchist brain is like, great, yeah, music should be free, it shouldn't have anything to do with money. However, this thing now, people value art and money as being like, well, I can get this for free on my phone. Why am I going to go to a weird, parking garage somewhere in the middle of the night and pass that and put some money in a hat for you? Like, I can just get it, So, the feeling of, I started circling back to this, the political spaces. I think that's the thing of having space where you can come and you can hang out, you don't have to buy a coffee, no one turned away for lack of funds, just come be with people. And that in itself is revolutionary and evolutionary to the point where the energy starts to move, and it's not just hermetically sealed in either your phone or in a place where you have to have $20 to get in the door or more. So that.
And even just a space where people look at, this is the status quo of what music and art has become in our society, where people say, well, what if it's not? Even just that, I think it becomes really important. So we have 5 minutes left before we're going to open it up to the audience. So I just want to make sure that we touch on
warmed up and stuff.
I know the important question of bringing in some radical imagination of the DIY scene that we would love to see for New York City. When you imagine what you would want for a space in New York, what do you think about? Or a space or a scene or just the next era?
I think it's really, really important to not gatekeep information and knowledge about how anything works, and that's what we try to do with Chaos Computer, and there's always ways to improve, but I think that a really good goal is to, for Chaos Computer, we have one of the founders made a handbook for how to run the sound system that I still have if anyone wants me to send it to them, you can talk to me, just generally one of the things that's great about spaces like this is that you have, we don't have to be gatekeeping any of this knowledge of how finances or how equipment or booking or anything works, because we don't want to gatekeep it, because we want other people to be able to do it, and no one's just it's not about looking after yourself and your source of income. It's about community building, encouraging people to come out of an experience like that, learning skills, and as well as meeting like-minded people. But yeah, I don't know. There's no funding for the arts, so obviously, I think we need more eccentric millionaires to buy buildings. That's honestly what I don't know. It's every situation that I've seen is always really finite, which there's something exciting and cool about knowing that a space is going to end, and so just trying to do as much as you can with it while it exists. But for something to be able to last, we have to own stuff, and no one can afford to. So hopefully, maybe someone will see this and be like, hey, I want to use my money to.
I want to be an eccentric billionaire.
Yeah, so let's go.
Billionaire.
Okay. Well, I just keep thinking about how many
Don't be shy.
Yeah, okay, I just wanted to
Proudly.
say it, because I think it's very beautiful reunion. Yeah, I guess just with what you said, yeah, melting shame that keeps us from helping each other. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, I'll say that. And the feeling of, yeah, two things that I feel are maybe being a little less, how do I put it? Okay, so the thing about Chaos Computer I loved was that an expiration date, sort of. I mean, when it was presented to me, like, okay, we're gonna do this, we kind of have this building for a year, let's do it for a year. And having that kind of, that feeling of impermanence gave it more of a threat, like a less, how am I saying? It was more grounded in the reality of the New York that we're living in, because yes, they're building something bigger and shinier and more expensive down the block, and it's going to come get you eventually. Or your landlord is going to be like, you know what, I'm selling the building. So that feeling of this city is constantly shifting underneath our feet all the time, and I think that's been the vibe since the jump. It's always been like this. And you can't get sentimental about like, oh, we need a space that's going to be here forever, and it's going to be our special spot. I think we need to maybe acclimate ourselves to this. Here's a space, we know how this works. We're going to, like Charlie's saying, we're going to share the information of how this works with you, because all of you are going to be inspired enough to go off and try to find your spot to do your particular thing, and now you have the tools to do that. So we can't really rely on wealthy benefactors or space to open up that's just going to be permanent and here forever. We kind of need to be a little bit more nimble on our feet and kind of shut up. Stop talking. Yeah.
But no, like, I think it's a great point, and, you know, that makes sense for the current moment that we're in New York, to think about things this way, like sharing resources, sharing information, acknowledging some sort of time frame constraint on a project. You know, you're saying that speaks to kind of like the New York we're in right now, I think, is interesting and true. So we're gonna have 15 minutes for questions, and I'm just gonna audience questions. And if you have a question, I will bring the microphone over to you. So,
In the middle.
oh yeah.
So, the thing I pondered on the aspect of political project and the DIY space, does the situation that we're in, does it require musicians, like, you know, people who want to organize a space, to kind of walk back and say, well, I mean, these eccentric millionaires won't raise their hands. And we've been kind of talking with other artists. Does this mean that this may be a time to kind of interact with people, with groups, or with circles that I know that, on the face of it, have no relationship to music art, but may have a good working relationship. And the thing that they're, like, for example, like, I don't know, I remember looking shows and playing shows like VFW, it's like these veteran, these Greek American, you know, like veteran spaces, or, you know, like if, like, there's a local, like, Asian American activist group in Astoria or something that, like, musicians can come in and build something together. It does, the situation that we have now does require us to kind of walk back and just think of the grander space around us.
I think so. That a lot of the shows that I do these days are at places where it's, you know, I throw shows and parties and a big sort of this comic book shop in Crown Heights, and that only happened because a friend of mine was just asking door to door at different commercial, you know, properties, just like literally like 99-cent stores and restaurants asking if they had any room for him to rent a room for a studio, which I thought was a really creative approach because the truth is a lot of these, like he was telling me, a lot of people will engage in that conversation. And again, like I said before, having a studio is like, you know, it's like a step in the direction of having a space where you can do a show or whatever. So yeah, I think by necessity we have to, like, you know, like just get creative and ask people that we might not normally talk to what they're willing to do, what they can offer.
So I work at a library. I'm reminded of this because there was also a discussion about walking into a place that you don't have to buy coffee, right? Libraries are the only place that I go, oh, you can't buy coffee. The coffee bit, as far as I understand, libraries are the only places in the city that you can walk in and you don't have to buy a thing. But this is just an observation. But in my practice is trying to like convince at least the library that I've worked at to like have a space to set up a show. One of two things happens. Thing number one is yeah, sure, we'll book some shows. Just give us a bill of, and we'll book it for next year. And the time will be Wednesday at 1:32 p.m. And there's also the bit that I'm losing my train of thought. My apologies. But I don't know. It's quite impressive thing. And of course, we have a mayor that has no desire to keep any of this stuff open. So yeah, it's even harder in the nonprofit in these spaces where we can walk in and have a cup, and just not have a cup of coffee, but there's mechanisms or whatever that prevent us from doing so.
Hello. It makes me really happy to hear somebody talk about Chicago, because I'm from Chicago and pretty much like who I am as a person was developed in Chicago. But I think, and this is a very Chicago thing, at the risk of sounding like an asshole, my question is very materialist in nature, which is like, so when you're talking about having access to space, I'm like, literally down the street there's a Quaker church that wants to promote shows, and like I also know of like nonprofits that want to help out artists. I have access to rich people who like are basically so depressed that they want to like they'll throw their money at whatever makes them not feel like dying. But to facilitate me communicating that with some people, it's very hard for only connected to very specific people. And expecting people to have the space and capacity to spread that information around is asking a lot of like 1, 2, 3 people. So my ask is like, can we get some group chats going from this? Can we get like a Google Doc going? Because I like seeing, and it's funny because there's people in this room that I've seen so many times, and like I don't know their names, and I'm like, I would love to actually be able to like connect with people who I keep coming and like existing in the same rooms as, so yeah,
That's what it's all about. Yeah. I'd love to be in any group chats. Or like, yeah, I think that anywhere, you know, I want to hear what people have to say about like, you know, any of the like places you mentioned, church, community center, whatever, like, you know, its space is pretty limited these days out here. So anyone who's interested in providing it, you know, let's talk.
Yeah, I think this is also a good mentality to, as artists, that there's not just only two options. together, you do have to look at every space and every person as a potential ally or potential space that could be used in the way that it was not designed to be used. And that's, I think, the bottom line to a lot of these spaces that we have experience with and that exists right now in New York City is that they're underutilized and they just need to be activated. And yeah, that could be a church, it could be a VFW, it could be, I mean, these all are spaces that when I first started doing shows as a teenager, I never booked in a club. I didn't have the connections, but I had connections to the church because my dad was a minister and we went to church, and I had connections to a VFW hall because they were desperate for money and they would just rent to anybody. So it's, the feeling of like, don't rule anything out. Every resource is precious. Any resource that you have, any person in your life that you know, is a viable option just to introduce the idea. And also, I've known people who don't exist in this world who, when you start doing these kinds of events in their space, they realize that they have an artistic spirit themselves and that they're excited by this. And you've opened up something for this, sad, lonely landlord, which just wants to have people around to hang out with. So yeah, like I said, this making science fiction a reality for people is a revolutionary act. And we can do that by taking whatever space, adapting it to the very basic needs that you need to make art, and just, going from there.
Thank you all so much for sharing your perspectives. I was just curious, in the spirit of transparency, this space that we're in right now, is this funded by an eccentric millionaire? Or, I was just curious, if anyone felt comfortable talking about how Issue Project Room functions and how the connection with this space is happening.
Hi, I'm Zach Greenfield. I'm the executive director of Issue Project Room. 2 years ago, we convinced our landlord to donate the space to us. So this is a home for everybody, and we're really pleased that you're here, and we're really pleased that this conversation is taking place, and we're really pleased to be giving the space to our curatorial fellows to use. Today is actually our 20th anniversary, November 4th, 2003. Suzanne Field, the founder of the Issue Project Room, founded it under the exact same principles as what's being spoken about. So we're fulfilling her dream, and this room, this environment is here for artists to work and develop. We have challenges with the city in the renovation process to make sure the space is up to code, but we're in here trying to operate it as efficiently as possible and do that with the support of the community. So, yeah.
One quick follow-up question. So that's super fascinating. I would love to know, to the degree that you feel comfortable, a little bit, what was that negotiation process like with the landlord, and what was the value add to them to donate this space? Because obviously this is prime real estate, and a lot of things can be done with it.
It's a long story, one that I probably don't want to take us too far off track, so we can talk afterwards. But in general, being a non-profit, you have a level of accountability and transparency, and so we leaned into that in conversations with the city council members, government agencies, and the landlord, and that was just part of a long negotiation. But again, I'm happy to talk more about it afterwards if there's any.
Okay, cool. Just wanted to also add happy 20th birthday to Issue Project. Question.
So thank you for that question. If you were interested, I recommend looking into our installation around the room with various documents So there is some history of Issue Project Room in this room in terms of real estate. Not to be the magician or the trick, but please investigate the various objects, except DK's objects, unless DK wants you to.
Okay, so we have time for the kids for questions, so maybe here and then here.
Hi. So a lot of those crazy. I sort of following up on this concept, like, I know like some, like you've all sort of worked in different venues and spaces on sort of a gradient of legality, which I think is like super cool and impressive. And I'm just really, I'm curious about like how you as organizers and like artists have navigated the sort of needs and expectations of people you're collaborating with in those spaces. Like how is like maybe working with the issue project group people different than working in like a place like Chaos Computer? Or and like how are you like, keeping like if you're creative artists, like what are you doing to keep them safe in those spaces or things like that? I just don't know.
Okay, well, yeah, I think it's important that the approach is always towards creating a community space. And with that in mind, you can, I don't know, it ends up kind of like covering your bases because you're building from the ground up with this kind of eye contact relationship with everyone you're working with. If you're working with people because they're the new trendy thing to work with, then you can kind of tell that's the founding principle of your work. And to me, that goes into just like the show. Let's do the show. Let's sell some tickets. Let's make money for everybody. And that's the show. And that can be a part of the community building process, sure, because you want to entertain people. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's also when you start with kind of, I guess, for me personally, when I was finding my voice or whatever as a curator, not a performer, but learning how to put together, a lineup, work with people, I always thought in terms of like, what kind of community do I want to bring to this space? And one of the core principles was I'm not interested in homogeny. I'm not interested in people who all know each other and all play with each other and all grew up together and all have the same cultural background and all have the same ideas about politics. Community is about that mix of conflicting ideas and conflicting aesthetics and a little bit of like friction. Not that everyone's at war with each other, but you need to have many voices in the room and they need to sound different from each other. And when you have this kind of one voice approach, I think that's when you're in danger of fascism. I don't know. That's where that leads. That's kind of the end game for that, for me personally. I don't know. I'm overblowing it, but.
Great. Do you want to
Hi, I had a question about, I guess you guys could answer it personally, but also just generally, how you feel like the internet has impacted how DIY functions. Because I'd also like to hear a lot about how you feel about it, because you're obviously a lot older than me.
Obviously.
Sorry.
I'm happy to be
The way that I grew up, I kind of watched the internet go from this kind of like free landscape where people just do whatever the hell they wanted, and then it's gotten really, really I don't know, gentrified almost. There's so many parts of the internet where it's paywall, and it kind of mirrors how things have happened in the real world, in a really scary way. Everything that happened with Bandcamp, if people are familiar with that, and it's still happening. But I just want to know how you guys feel about the internet and DIY and how those things have impacted you, or just generally,
It's been a really interesting experience seeing things change over the past few years for me. I've always used social media as a tool of promotion and just organizing since I was very young. Facebook, and now it's Instagram, and I'm not going to get a TikTok, but and, no shame, I just don't. But yeah, I think that it's still a really powerful tool for just reaching people. You have to sort of learn how to manipulate it that, you know, as long as it's also backed up by like real, like, you know, face-to-face interactions and like getting people's numbers, texting them, email threads are great too. But I guess, sorry if that's like not fully answering your question, but like for me it's like social media is like a part of the internet that like really like builds up these seeds in terms of like letting people know about like what's going on, like show-wise or space-wise. But at the same time, like, you know, the more evidence you have of doing something illegal, the more likely you're going to get shut down. Like 2 months into Chaos Computer, the fire department came and they had like a printed out list of all, they had like our website printed out. They were like, this is Chaos Computer, like, oh, you know, like, we know what you've been doing because someone called 311 on us trying to get us shut down. Why? But, you know, if we had been private, like if our Instagram had been private and we'd been more careful about how we were like getting info out, there's no way that could have happened. So, I don't know, it's like, you gotta kind of like, it's a tightrope to walk, I guess.
No, I see it, my analogy I always go to is Instagram to me is like a telephone pole. What we used to use to promote shows. You just go to a telephone pole and you tack up a flyer, someone else put a flyer there, so put a flyer on top of that, and you just have like layers and layers of flyers. But that's how you knew where to go for the show, or whatever the protest. And so I kind of see it as like, it's just, internet is yet another tool that, yeah, it's a pretty all-consuming tool. It can be addictive. It can, I think it's literally changing the way brains work, and the way we take in information. However, we all understand that it's not a replacement for an in-person interaction or an actual object, which is, from my perspective, I'm seeing a lot of objects coming back into the realm of DIY as far as like cassette tapes or zines or actual paper flyers that people put in their hand. And I see it as like, this is because that's also very effective and it's very much makes it more of a reality. A lot of things happen on the internet that are not real and that don't have any bearing on real life. So it's easy just to kind of get swept up into the Milky Way of it, and you never land. So, yeah, all I'd say, as long as you're using the internet in moderation and go to a show in person, that's all you're fine.
It's interesting because a whole other topic that we could speak about that we did is just media projects, and I think all of you, I have observed or worked with you on like writing, or Charlie has a newsletter, I know that you've done zines and reviews, writing projects, and thinking about like how that fits into the tapestry that creates like DIY culture and how that gets us into spaces. Maybe that would be the next conversation. Thank you for our time, but yeah, thank you all so much for sharing with everyone. Talk to each other. Yeah, and somebody should make that group chat too.
And don't be, talk to any of us if you want to, even though the Q&A is